Front and Center. Front and Center. A focus on important and significant developments affecting the lives of Filipinos, not only in the Philippines, but also those living and working around the world. Join us in Front and Center. Front and Center. Here on Radyo Pilipinas World Service.
Welcome to Front and Center, where we focus on developments in the Philippines, legislation that provides policies, and directions that strives to promote a better economy for the country, issues that concern the welfare and well-being of every Filipino. All of these and more will be Front and Center. You can watch this program on our Facebook page and YouTube channel, Radyo Pilipinas World Service. And this program can also be heard on the following shortwave frequencies: 12.010 MHz, 15.640 MHz, and 17.820 MHz. And join us for another edition of Front and Center with your host, Jerome Toledo. And in this edition of Front and Center, we will be focusing on President Ferdinand R. Marcos Jr.'s intervention on the ASEAN-China Summit. Was he able to present his case to the ASEAN member states and as well as China during the summit? And to discuss about that topic, let's have Professor Renato De Castro, the foreign policy expert and security analyst from De La Salle International Studies. So, welcome to the program again, Professor De Castro.
Good afternoon, Jerome, and good afternoon to our fellow Filipinos and for other international international listeners.
All right. And welcome back to our program as well. Okay, so first things first, so what's your reaction on the call of President Ferdinand R. Marcos Jr. on his intervention statement in front of Chinese Premier Li Keqiang?
Well, before leaving for Laos, President Marcos indicated that he will advance Philippine national interests in this ASEAN summit. And of course, he did. Basically, our interest involves asserting our rights and, of course, calling into attention China's coercive and aggressive actions against the Philippine Coast Guard, against the Philippine Navy, and against ordinary Filipino fisher folks, who are, of course, being driven away by the Chinese Navy, the Chinese Coast Guard, and the Chinese maritime militia in the West Philippine Sea, South China Sea. He said it. So that's what basically he did. He told the Premier Lee, who was, of course, advocating member states, that you cannot have economic integration if we don't resolve, tiny territorial disputes, like, of course, the West Philippine Sea, South China Sea. And, of course, he raised the fact that economics is linked with politics and diplomacy. Mm-hmm. And to the fellow ASEAN member states, he basically called to their attention the need to push for a China-ASEAN Code of Conduct. So that's what he basically did.
Okay, and of course, other countries or other ASEAN member state countries have, economic ties with China. So how can China balance the economic and diplomatic aspects? So since we are talking about the Code of Conduct in the South China Sea, given that other ASEAN member states has economic interest with China.
It's not just an economic interest, Jerome. You have to also understand geography. For the continental Southeast Asian countries, for example, Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, Thailand, the South China Sea issue is peripheral. It's not their primary concern. So don't expect things to go gang-ho when we talk about the West Philippine Sea, South China Sea issue. Then, of course, you have the maritime Southeast Asian countries, Singapore, Indonesia, Brunei, Vietnam, and, of course, the Philippines. In terms of the maritime Southeast Asian countries, two Southeast Asian countries, Indonesia and, of course, Singapore, are not claimant countries. So again, the South China Sea issue is not a matter of primary interest. Indonesia has been very vocal by the fact that it's not a claimant state. Its only concern, of course, is the fact that a large portion of the water surrounding the Natuna Island falls within China's 10-line. Singapore's issue with the South China Sea issue is a matter of abstract adherence to international law. So you only have actually four claimant countries, and of course, again, their approaches are different.
Yeah.
Brunei and Singapore, of course, would like a what they call a silent approach towards China. Of course, you leave only Vietnam and the Philippines. Vietnam shares a land border with China, and of course, Vietnam and China are both communist countries. So again, when it comes to the South China Sea issue, geography, our
Proximity.
basically our need to protect our maritime entitlements, and of course, in a way, our alliance with the United States, and of course, the support of our security partners like Japan, Australia, South Korea, and India, in a way, enable us to have a different approach when it comes to the West Philippine Sea, South China Sea issue. But at the end of the day, it is a matter of national interest. It's our national interest to ensure and protect our maritime entitlement in the South China Sea. No other ASEAN country would basically have this as their national interest.
Okay, I wonder, Professor De Castro. So, is China using her economic prowess, since China is one of the leading economic powerhouse, not in Asia but in the world, to sway ASEAN members from discussing the code of conduct in the South China Sea or the West Philippine Sea?
Definitely, of course. This became very apparent in 2012 when China gave the host country, Cambodia, remember? Almost $5 billion before the ASEAN summit. So, this was the first time that ASEAN was not able to come out with a chairman's communique. China basically showed to the ASEAN country, I have the economic clout to push the levers. If you're challenging my interests, which of course is South China Sea, and primarily because you are dependent on me economically. China has it, so why don't you think China will not use it? So it's only natural when China would use its economic clout to basically sway almost the majority of Southeast Asian countries to have either an indifferent approach when it comes to the West Philippine Sea, South China Sea issue, or a different approach in compared to the Philippines. So that's a reality we have to take into account.
Okay, but of course, the United States also uses her power to, in opposite to what China's doing, is to push the talks of the code of conduct in the South China Sea. So, what's going to be like for an ASEAN member state, or for ASEAN in general?
Well, actually, in reality, you have only the four claimant countries who might have the real interest when it comes to the code of conduct. Indonesia, primarily because of its role as the primus inter pares in ASEAN. Singapore, just to, of course, manage the dispute. So that's a reality we face. The fact that you have obstacles when it comes to the code of conduct, and among the 10 member ASEAN states, there are only about 5, probably 6, that might have an interest in pushing for a code of conduct. But again, whether pushing for a code of conduct is a matter of their vital interest is another matter.
Okay, I see. And also, Professor De Castro, so is ASEAN members, or are ASEAN member states taking the code of conduct passage issue? Are they taking it seriously? So because President Marcos repeatedly calls for the passage of the code as soon as possible. So will the ASEAN give time to this?
Well, publicly, of course, they express their support to the code of conduct. But once you have, of course, the closed door negotiation, that's where their national interests would have to be factored in. So again, I already mentioned to you, for the continental Southeast Asian countries, pushing for the code of conduct is not a matter of vital interest. And of course, among the 6 maritime Southeast Asian countries, their interest when it comes to this, the advancement of a code of conduct again varies.
It varies. You mentioned earlier that depends on geography, like for example proximity from where China is. Is that correct, Professor?
Yep, of course, for us, the code of conduct is very important because it is a matter of restraining Chinese action in our exclusive economic zone. Given the fact, of course, that in recent months, we have been, of course, the target of Chinese coercive actions. The use of their maritime militia, the use of their Coast Guard, the use of their Navy to basically prevent us, for example, from resupplying our outposts at Ayungin Shoal, and of course, driving away our fisher folks in Scarborough Shoal, in Escoda Shoal, so forth and so on. So this is, we simply have to bite the bullet at the end of the day because, the West Philippine Sea, South China Sea issue compared to other Southeast Asian countries is a matter of vital interest for the Philippines.
All right. And it seems like this is the issue is far from over from being resolved. But of course, is there any chance to have a code of a solid code of conduct on South China Sea issue? Since you mentioned that, there are lots of confrontation between Philippines and China. So, is there a chance to have a solid code of conduct on the South China Sea issue?
Given the situation right now, the only possible outcome would be at least a code of conduct among the four claimant states: the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, and Brunei. In a way, given our close strategic partnership with Vietnam, we already have a code of conduct with Vietnam. The only challenge for us, of course, is a code of conduct with Malaysia and with Brunei. So at this point in time, we can at least hope and expect at least a code of conduct among the four claimant states in the South China Sea.
Okay, and it should have a unilateral code of conduct. You mean, Professor De Castro?
Just four claimant countries.
Four claimants. Okay.
Just a code of conduct, but okay.
All right.
Because again, the rest of Southeast Asian countries, especially the continental Southeast Asian countries, do not really consider the pursuit of a code of conduct as a matter of vital national interest.
I see. Okay. Last two questions, Professor De Castro. So, what could be the role of other nations, of course, like our like-minded allies like the United States, Japan, Australia, South Korea, or even Vietnam, of course, in the passage of the Code of Conduct?
Well, now forget about the code of conduct at this point in time. The important point is to manage the tension.
Yes.
So of course we have our treaty alliance with the United States. China would have to take into account that any action that might be construed as a use of force would of course bring in the United States. We have of course Japan providing us Coast Guard vessels that would enable us of course to assert our interest in the West Philippine Sea, South China Sea. You have also South Korea. President Yoon visited Manila, I think, during the weekend and assured us that South Korea would support us in the modernization of the armed forces of the Philippines, especially the Navy. Then, of course, India, Australia have already indicated the support. Then, of course, recently you have the quadrilateral security dialogue made up of Japan, the United States, India, and Australia, indicating, showing their support to the Philippine position when it comes to the West Philippine Sea, South China Sea issues.
All right.
So all the hope is not lost. We're not alone with this issue.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, of course, we could only get so much from ASEAN, but we still have a support from other like-minded countries. So let's not despair about this issue.
Okay, and to add that, Professor De Castro, so there's one nation that throwing support to us, which is Canada, which
yes, of course,
yesterday,
Canada, a like-minded country.
Yes,
and of course the European Union, and Germany and France. So we're not alone, except of course the fact again, the reality is. ASEAN operates on ASEAN is a pure intergovernmental regional organization. It operates on the basis of the national interest of its 10 member states.
Okay. Like we didn't mention, Professor De Castro, Canada is throwing support to us by meeting with President Marcos Jr. and, of course, the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Trudeau said that he is open to have a reciprocal access agreement like what we have in Japan. So, what's your reaction on that?
Well, of course, also Canada is providing us technology to basically monitor dark ships. They have provided that very expensive technology to the Philippine Coast Guard. So again, my point is, let's not despair, given the fact that we're not getting the support that we wanted from ASEAN, simply because of the reality. ASEAN is a pure intergovernmental organization. It operates simply on the basis of the national interest of its 10 member states. But again, we're getting support from like-minded countries.
Okay. All right. One final question, Professor De Castro, on this particular topic. So, does President Ferdinand R. Marcos Jr. Brought his case very well to the ASEAN members and also in China during that ASEAN-China summit?
Yes, he did, because that was his promise before he left for Laos. I will advance Philippine national interests. And of course, he basically fulfilled his promise by bringing out that issue during the ASEAN-China, the dialogue or summit meeting.
Okay. All right. With that, thank you so much for your valuable insights regarding this issue on ASEAN-China Summit. And I hope President Ferdinand R. Marcos Jr. will have a productive meeting, of course, with other countries, as well as have a resolution regarding this issue in the South China Sea. So thank you so much, Professor Renato De Castro, for joining us in the program Front and Center.
Thank you. Okay, have a great afternoon.
Okay, and that was Professor Renato De Castro, the foreign policy expert and security analyst from De La Salle International Studies. And that concludes this edition of Front and Center on Radyo Pilipinas World Service. Together with our producer Erwin Peñano and technical personnel Milo Janela. Join us again here on Front and Center. This is Jerome Toledo saying mabuhay and love the Philippines.
You have just heard and watched Front and Center. Front and Center. Join us again for another edition here on Radyo Pilipinas World Service. Front and Center.